Hi guys, how are you? Um, so I'm sorry I can't be there with you, but it's wonderful to be able to speak with you over Skype. Now, if we have any connection issues, somebody please tell me, because I can't see you guys. I can hear you guys a little bit. So, okay, here's what I want to talk to you about today. In three very simple sections, and I'm going to keep it short and quick and sweet and maybe a little bit painful. The macroeconomics of meaning, the microeconomics of meaning, and the politics of meaning. So, you guys have talked a lot about meaning, and it's been kind of at the core of my work for many, many years now. Mostly because when I set up my think tank, one of the core ideas was that economics kind of ignored the biggest aspect of human life, which is the idea of meaning, which is the idea that in some sense we're all here to live meaningful lives. And economics, which is kind of let's say, the ruling ideology of the day, has pretty much overlooked this thing completely. And I think that's really at the heart of some of the great tensions that are hitting the global economy. So let me begin with a quick take on the macroeconomics of meaning. If I was to ask you, what does the average kind of citizen of the world look like today, and what is his future? I bet a lot of you would probably be pretty optimistic. I, on the other hand, am not optimistic. The average global citizen today is somebody that earns around $7,000 to $8,000. Okay, he's probably a man, probably lives in a place like China or India or Africa. And is his income going up? Yes. But is his chance at a meaningful life really going up? Maybe not so much. So let me kind of outline these macroeconomics for you for a second. His income is about $7,000 to $8,000. Now, the level of income that we know one needs to attain, I would say a shot at happiness, is somewhere north of $70,000. So the question is, how are we going to lift all of these people? There's billions of people around the world whose average income, remember, half of them are earning less than that, whose average income is about $7,000. How are we going to multiply it by 10 times? In our lifetimes, that average income may double. It may even triple. But it's definitely not going up by 10 times. And so we begin to see the outlines of a real tension at the heart of the global economy, which is that incomes are not going to rise fast enough for the vast majority of people in the world to have a shot at a meaningful, at a happy, at a truly prosperous life. And that's kind of the core setup for, I think, a lot of the tensions in the global economy today. And nowhere is that more clear than in the case of the United States of America. What I've spoken to you about, the average global citizen, is kind of an abstraction. And when I say to you the average global income is something like $7,000, $8,000, you probably think of kind of poor people. But here's a pretty mind-blowing statistic. 40% of people, of workers in the US, earn less than $20,000 a year. So again, if we take that happiness threshold of about $60,000 to $70,000 to have a shot at happiness, 40% of those guys, a lot more, are probably never gonna get there. And so if we think about this wave of protest movements that is spreading across the globe, if we think about this sense of unease, if we think about this sense of discontent with today's institutions, the fact that we're all really fed up and we're all really kind of, jaded and cynical about the capacity of these institutions to really meaningfully improve our lives. That's the truth. These institutions are unable to lift our incomes fast enough to reach that threshold of happiness and to the threshold of meaning, which I would say even lies beyond it. And so when we think about the macroeconomics of meaning, there are two big questions. One is, can we achieve a smarter form of growth such that for every dollar or pound of income or wealth that each and every single person on planet Earth receives or accumulates, can we build institutions that deliver more meaning per dollar? Because if you take the proposition that average incomes aren't going to multiply by 10 times in a human lifetime, is historically unprecedented. If proposition, then the only other solution is that we have to build institutions that are capable of delivering more meaning for every increase in kind of material wealth or financial wealth that accrues to people. And I think that begins to tell us what our central challenge is. As people who are builders or leaders or captains of institutions that, may be large, maybe small, maybe startups, maybe established, we have to build institutions that deliver fundamentally and radically more meaning to people. Otherwise, these great tensions, this sense of discontent is going to keep growing. And make no mistake about it, this is a very serious situation. We already have a lost generation in the advanced world. And according to many accounts, across the whole world, young people do not have the sense that their lives are going to improve. Their parents understand that living standards for their own kids today, especially in the richest parts of the world, are beginning to fall. And that is because we have been unable to build institutions that are able to deliver more meaning per dollar or pound. Now, so that's kind of the broad setup. So let's go to the question of what is meaning? How do we build these institutions? Well, what I've tried to do is kind of delve into the heart of it. Okay, and for me, meaning is eudaimonic. It's about this old Greek word, eudaimonia. It's about living meaningfully well. And for the Greeks, eudaimonia, living meaningfully well, wasn't like, it wasn't what we see when, I spent half the year in London, half the year in New York, which are both, at this point, kind of equally obnoxious places, right? I mean, I go to London and it's full of like the sons and daughters of the super rich, like drinking $20,000 bottles of champagne. The other day in New York, I was just walking down the street, I saw a gold-plated Lamborghini. This stuff is crazy. It's insane. That's got nothing to do with eudaimonia. So eudaimonia, for the ancient Greeks, which I think is a timeless conception of the idea of a well-lived life, eudaimonia is the idea that, in some sense, our lives are well-rounded. And they're composed of the goods that really matter in terms of happiness and meaning. So it's composed of many different aspects of well-being. So social well-being, do we have solid relationships? Do we have, kind of coherent networks of friends and acquaintances and colleagues? Are we healthy mentally and physically? Are we kind of, do we have the stuff of emotional well-being? Many different aspects of well-being go into eudaimonia. And one of the things we do at my lab is we do one of the world's biggest research projects into well-being. We talk to over 150,000 people now in, God knows what, 50 countries or something, about the eudaimonic state of their lives, how their well-being is faring, what is the real state of their welfare. And what they come back to us and say, in every country we look at, is the same thing. They say, we don't want perfect lives. We're not utopians. We don't expect perfect lives for us. But what we do want is a sense of eudaimonia. We do want better lives, and not just materially better lives. We want meaningfully better lives. We want lives that feel full and whole and complete because they're composed of the things that matter. They're composed of friendships and love and respect and devotion and work that matters. A sense of security, a sense of stability, a sense of accomplishment. All of those things. And those are the real goods that an economy has to provide. From a microeconomic level, if it's just filling up our closets with kind of designer junk that's making us feel worse and worse and worse, we have to question, what is the point of all of this? Is that what real prosperity is? And so, for me, the question of meaning is very much about this idea of eudaimonia. And the challenge for us is to redirect a lot of the human effort that is going into very, very, I would say, dysdaimonic things, right? Things that make us, things that kind of give us the sensation that our lives don't matter. And redirecting that bulk of human effort into this eudaimonic paradigm, into this eudaimonic project. Because I think it's there that we'll really begin to build an economy in which we don't have to see incomes multiply by 10 times for people to have a shot at happiness and meaning, but in which people can begin to realize happiness and meaning at a lower threshold. So for me, meaning is about this 360-degree picture of well-being, whether it's social, emotional, physical, mental. And we can certainly have a debate about, what is that complete picture of well-being? I think one of the central challenges for us over the next 10, 15 years is to really begin to pin that idea down in a more rigorous way. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do at my lab. So that's kind of the macroeconomics and the microeconomics of well-being. The idea that the global economy is not delivering well-being fast enough and distributing it fairly enough for us to avoid the kind of tensions and discontent that we see with institutions across the globe. And what that's really resulting in is a kind of very, what I would say is a dangerous decade. You know, to be very honest with you guys, because I think I'm speaking to a room of, you know, to some extent like-minded people. I think the real danger over the next decade is that we enter something like a dark age. You know, and if any of you are familiar with the great urban economist Jane Jacobs, her last book, right before she died, was called Dark Age Ahead. And she talked about many of the tensions that we're beginning to see surface. And so, in terms of the politics of meaning, I think the real danger is that we are now entering an era where if you take two poles of a spectrum, right? So at one end, you have kind of like this eudaimonic thing. Everybody should have a chance at living a meaningful life. At the other end, you have a system that I call billionaireism, which says everybody should have a shot at being a billionaire. Now, we all know that not everybody in society is going to be a billionaire. Hell, there are 1,500 billionaires across the globe, so there are going to be very few. But billionaireism says that as long as everybody has the opportunity to become a billionaire, all is well with society. And we don't need to provide people things like basic public goods, education, health, transport. We don't need to give people things like basic human rights. Whether it's the right to free speech or invasion, you know, free privacy or fair trial or what have you. Billionaireism says those things are irrelevant and unnecessary as long as people have the capacity to reach this kind of insane level of material wealth. And I think that, to me, is the characteristic of a dark age. Because what is a dark age? A dark age is an age when the light goes out. Not the light out there in the world, but the light in us, the light in here. The light that says we all have to move. We all have to live our lives in such a way that it feels meaningful. Otherwise, at the end of the day, these lives will not amount to much. That is the characteristic of every dark age. And what happens in a dark age is that human effort gets redirected to goals that are totally meaningless in terms of real human prosperity. So we take, you know, the great European dark age. You know, souls were saved. Lots of souls were saved, but real human lives were ruined. And so I think the danger for us this decade, in terms of the politics of meaning, is that we're going to enter something like a dark age. And I see this dark age already emerging in the US very clearly. You know, we now have a situation, as a poll came out yesterday, fascinating number, 51% of people support the NSA's spying. They don't support basic rights. So we have this bizarre, absurd situation here where 51% of people approve of the idea of the rejection of democracy. It's a great paradox. But that's the dark age, right? When the light in here goes out. And so the challenge for us, if we are going to kind of be builders of a future worth inhabiting, is really to be rebels against this other paradigm. You know, whatever you want to call it, billionaireism, financial capitalism, I don't care what you call it. But our challenge is really creating this kind of new enlightenment. Our challenge is really switching the light on. Not the light out there, but the light inside people. And educating them and helping them understand that, you know, this idea of well-being and meaning and eudaimonia, this is kind of the central fundamental guiding concept of a life well lived. And unless we can build societies and economies that arc toward it, these tensions are going to keep resurfacing and resurfacing. Because just because 51% of people say, hey, it's okay if you spy on me and take away my basic rights, it doesn't mean that they're going to like the society they end up with as a result of their poor decisions. Just like if I spend my life eating Doritos and hang out on the couch, it may feel good in the moment, but it doesn't mean that a few years from now I won't say to myself, what the hell did I do with my life? It doesn't feel like it mattered. So part of our challenge as leaders of institutions is really being the kind of revolutionaries that turn the lights back on and kind of lead the fight against this new dark age that I see emerging. And I think, you know, I want to keep it short and sweet for you guys. So I think that's my central message to you. Those are the dangers, and those are kind of the opportunities and the hopes. And I think that if we do get that right, I do think that we can get it right. I do think that we can mount a very successful kind of, what shall I say, campaign against this stuff. I'll end with kind of a big story, which is that 50 years ago, after World War II, we really did redesign the world. It's people think, how did this great era of post-war prosperity, the greatest era of prosperity in human history, where did it come from? Well, it came from a handful of great minds, right? So somebody like John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was at the forefront of sitting down and redesigning a set of institutions that really took human prosperity forward, right? So institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF. Then we had institutions like the UN, like the EU. We had even smaller institutions, right? Like the NHS or the BBC. We had the rise of kind of corporations that actually wanted to do great things instead of, build flying cars or something. So the challenge for us is building a new set of institutions to take this eudaimonic paradigm forward with the scope and the ambition that our grandfathers had. And I think that's the challenge that we have to rise to. Because otherwise, the alternative future is very clear to me. It's the guys that I see in gold-plated Lamborghinis and their $3,000, $30,000 pound bottles of champagne, and for the rest of humanity, that sense that our lives haven't meant what they should, and I think that's the central challenge for us. So, thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Umair. Man, if you could cut the atmosphere in here with a knife after listening to that. So yeah, I think we have a few questions, like everything. So I guess the first question, just one from me, and then I'll check Twitter just to see what else has come in.
Sure.
What do you see the transition looking like between the billionairism that we see today, between the old capitalist system and the new system that you described that's based on building meaningful well-being for people?
Yeah.
How the hell are we going to get there?
It's a fantastic question. I think that, hold on, guys. I have an echo, so I'm going to just take off my headphones, okay? Hold on. Okay. So I think that it's going to take time, and it's not going to happen from one end of things. Okay, so if we look at the countries that have been marginally successful at resisting the encroachment of billionairism and really building kind of more eudaimonic societies, places like Australia, places like Scandinavia, places like Canada, even those places are facing great tensions. And so I think it's going to take, from our side, real ambition, right? So in the same way that, there's a lot of guys in Silicon Valley, like techno-utopians, right? And they have like insanely big dreams, right? Like let's go to Mars or let's launch billionaires into space or something. We need to have similarly big ambitions. So, one of the things I constantly say on Twitter is, why is it that we're allowing billionaires to say things like, we'll launch billionaires into space? Why should there be any billionaires in the world before everybody has an education? So we have to have similarly big ambitions. And we need to really rethink the idea of what an economy is from the ground up. And I think that it doesn't take like a huge organization to do it. Like I run this small think tank, we've got like 10 people in it. It's not huge. But it does give me a platform to begin really thinking about this stuff and talking about it. So for me, there are two kind of gaps, right? One is the scope of what we want to do. Often when we talk about people who want to change things and make a more meaningful world, it often boils down to discussions about like marginal tax rates or like, can I make like, I don't know, slightly more ethical chocolate or something. And I'm not saying that those things are bad. I think those things are fantastic. But I do think there has to be a big scope of ambition. And I'll refer you back to Keynes's ambition. Keynes didn't want to just kind of like fix the British economy. He wanted to create a World Bank and IMF that made sure that financial crises never happened again. Now, that's a real ambition. And that's one of the things I talked about in Betterness, the sense that we need to really elevate, the level of our ambition to a global level, to something that encompasses every person across the globe.
Wow, okay, thank you. So a question from Dave Boyle in the audience. So how do we build institutions, and who are the we, and what are our levers to actually build this new stuff?
Well, listen, I think that part of the challenge is you have to be the leaders that build these institutions. Okay, so let me go back to the example of Keynes. So Keynes had this huge global ambition. And through Keynes, we built these things like the World Bank and the IMF. Now, the World Bank and the IMF today have turned into these insane kind of bureaucracies that are stifling the very ambitions that Keynes had for them in the first place. So ambition itself is not enough. We need different kinds of organizations. Now, the catch is, I don't think we know what those organizations are like, because I don't think we're being experimental enough with the kinds of organizations that we build. When we build organizations, oftentimes it reverts back to this very hierarchical, militaristic corporate model. And we know that once you do that, the same old tension surfaces. The psychopaths rise to the top, and the people who want to do anything decent and good and awesome and interesting and cool and visionary stay at the bottom. And so that kind of structure is not going to work. But we don't know what kind of structure is going to work because we haven't tried it yet. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is be totally experimental when you're setting up a new startup or a new organization. You know, be completely radical when you're doing it. I mean, why do we have, why the hell should a startup be run like a corporation instead of a band? You know, why the hell should an organization that wants to do something awesome and interesting and cool in the world, why should it be run like Procter and Gamble instead of like a small group of creative people, like a creative co-op? You know, I don't think that we've tried enough of this stuff. And I think part of the challenge for us is really to go forth and challenge a lot of these structures. And I mean to do it in a rigorous and serious way. So for example, now we have the rise of things like B corporations, different kinds of vehicles that give us the legal right and the obligation to go out and pursue some of these goals. I think that's very important. But I think the second aspect of it is that you have to, one of the reasons I set up the lab is because even structure by itself is not enough. You need to be able to measure and monitor what you're doing. And so one of the reasons I set up my lab was to be able to go out and do exactly this research, talk to hundreds and thousands of people across the world, and get data from them about what their level of well-being is, so that when other people go out and build, you know, those institutions, we can then begin to monitor, like, did we actually have that impact, right? Because what the billionairists have is this insane system of bottom lines that tells them, okay, we made a profit. What we don't have on the eudaimonic side is an equivalent set of, you know, let's call them accounts or some kind of basic data for well-being, right? And so part of the challenge is connecting the two. So I think, you know, all of those things have to fit together, right? The structure, the function, and then the actual kind of like reporting on this stuff. You know, but for my money, if you're setting something new up, man, go to town, like study the actual organizations that you think are cool. Does anybody think Procter & Gamble is cool? Walmart? No, come on. Who do we think are cool? Like artists and writers and rock bands, right? So like, let's study those guys and figure out how are they able to be so creative? And then set up organizations that kind of meld a lot of those characteristics. Does that make sense? And final thing I will say is that, like, if you're looking for me to give you the examples, I can't do it yet. But 10 years from now, I guarantee you that every business school and every law school and every school in the world will be like, oh my God, that guy set up this radical kind of organization. And they'll give you case studies on exactly the kind of organizations that you guys should be going and setting up now. But right now, the challenge is for you guys to be the leaders that go out and do it, not to look at the case studies yet.
Thank you. So we've got probably time for one more question, just a couple of minutes left. So which one should I go for? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Okay, so here we go. This is a big one. We've got a minute and a half. Do you believe that democracy can stop the new dark age, or is it about a new revolution?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question, and it's something I'm thinking about a lot. Look, I think that one of the challenges that we have, and after thinking about it a lot, I'm going to give you a quick answer, and it may be too much of an answer. So let me try and simplify it as much as I can. Look, I think that we need to really rethink the institutions of democracy, okay? So for example, in the UK and the US, we have the dumbest democratic systems in the world. They're relics, they're historical relics. We are operating constitutional democracy. We are operating democracies according to rules that are totally obsolete and totally outdated. You know, the US was the world's first constitutional blah, 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 blah. Now, that constitution was written 200 and something years ago. Now we've had great innovations in nation building, in the idea of democracy itself. And let me give you a few. So in Australia, they have the compulsory voting thing, right? But they also have a voting system that helps them minimize strategic voting. It's not just binary, right? Either or, like the system that we have in the US or the UK. And I know that we had a referendum in the UK for different kinds of voting systems a few years back, and people rejected it. But for my money, the nations that move out of this dark age will be the nations that reinvent their democracies. So am I a believer in democracy? Yes. Do I think that what we are practicing in the US and the UK and in many other nations, for example, India, et cetera, is democracy? Only at the most minimal level, in the same way that a chicken McNugget is food. Okay? A serious democracy is something like what Switzerland has. Right? So for my money, yeah, I think we can do it, but we also have to be very, very challenging of the status quo and say, look, guys, when we talk about reinventing stuff, I'm not just, so let me give it to you in another way. When I talk about reinventing stuff, I'm not just saying, guys, go out and make a slightly shinier iPhone. You know, Apple made a blingier iPhone, you make a platinum one. No, I mean, let's go out and reinvent democracy and capitalism and all of these things. Otherwise, they're going to come back and, you know, the opportunities we already have are very limited. So we need to think at that level, globally, in terms of these big, big institutions. And I think if we can do that, then I think we have a real shot at moving into the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Umair. We're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. But yeah, thanks so much.
That was fantastic. Super.